After my trip, I found my room gutted for my brother's studio. Dad pointed to the yard, sleep in the dirt or leave. So I left. A year later, my phone blew up with 60 missed calls. My name is Hazel. I am 25 years old, and I work as a digital content creator based in the often cloudy, quietly bustling city of Grand Rapids, Michigan. If you do not know what a digital content creator actually does behind the scenes, let me paint you a picture. It is not just about posting pretty pictures or talking into a camera. It is a relentless, exhausting grind. It means staying up until 3 in the morning staring at video editing software until your eyes burn. It means negotiating with difficult clients, managing a chaotic schedule, and constantly fighting the algorithm just to stay relevant. But I loved it. I loved the independence it gave me, and more importantly, I loved the financial stability it finally brought into my life. After years of scraping by, taking every small gig I could find, I had just signed a massive, long-term contract worth $30,000. For the first time in my entire adult life, I could actually take a deep breath. I was not just surviving anymore, I was building an empire, brick by tiny brick. But my professional success stood in sharp, bitter contrast to my home life. I still lived in my childhood home with my parents, Richard and Diana. Living at home at 25 was not exactly my dream, but I stayed because I was the glue holding our fragile financial situation together. My father, Richard, was a stern, deeply traditional man who had spent his youth chasing failed business ventures. He carried the heavy, unspoken bitterness of a man whose grand dreams never materialized, and he projected that frustrated ambition entirely onto my older brother, Garrett. Garrett was 28 years old, but you would never guess it by looking at how he lived. He was a live streamer. Now, I have nothing against streaming. It is a legitimate career for many hardworking people. But Garrett was not hardworking. He was arrogant, entitled, and utterly convinced that he was just one viral moment away from becoming a millionaire. He spent his days locked in his room, screaming into a microphone at a handful of viewers, leaving a trail of empty energy drink cans and unpaid bills in his wake. His wife, Bianca, lived with us too. Bianca was a piece of work. She was manipulative, obsessed with appearances, and constantly pushed Garrett to chase bigger sponsorships while she racked up credit card debt buying designer clothes she could not afford. And who paid for the foundation of their delusional lifestyle? I did. I was the reliable daughter. The ATM. I paid the exorbitant monthly internet bill because Garrett absolutely needed a flawless fiber optic connection for his streams. I pitched in heavily for groceries because 4 adults eat a lot of food, especially when 2 of them do not contribute a single dime. I even paid for the electricity that kept his gaming rigs running hot all night long. My parents never asked Garrett for rent. They never asked Bianca to get a real job. Diana, my mother, was a master of passive excuses. She would fold laundry with her head down and say things like, "He is just finding his footing, Hazel," or "The industry is tough. He needs our support." Richard was even worse. He saw Garrett's reckless streaming gamble as a modern version of his own youthful entrepreneurial spirit. To them, Garrett was a visionary waiting for his big break. I, on the other hand, with my steady, lucrative contracts, was just the boring, dependable workhorse meant to pull the plow while Garrett rode in the carriage. Despite the heavy, unspoken resentment that hung in the air of our house, I still craved my parents' approval. I think every child does, no matter how old they get or how much they have been pushed aside. I wanted them to look at me with the same sparkling pride they reserved for Garrett's imaginary achievements. So, with the security of my new $30,000 contract sitting in my bank account, I decided to do something monumental. I wanted to treat my parents to something they had never been able to afford. I planned a vacation. I spent hours researching, finding the perfect resort, looking at flights, and building an itinerary. I was going to take them to Hawaii. Just the 3 of us. I envisioned walks on the beach, quiet dinners where we could actually talk without the muffled sound of Garrett yelling at a video game through the ceiling. I thought this grand gesture would finally make them see me, make them realize that their daughter was successful, capable, and deeply loving. One evening, I prepared a beautiful dinner. I set the dining room table, making sure everything looked perfect. Richard and Diana sat down, looking a bit surprised by the effort. Even Garrett and Bianca wandered down from their cave, sniffing around for free food. I waited until everyone was seated and eating before I took a deep breath and made my announcement. I smiled, looking directly at my parents. I told them about my new contract, and then I dropped the surprise. I said I was booking a trip to Hawaii for the three of us. I explicitly stated that everything was completely covered: the flights, the luxury hotel, the food, the tours. Everything. For a brief, shining moment, the reaction was exactly what I had hoped for. Diana's eyes went wide, lighting up with genuine excitement. She dropped her fork, her hands fluttering to her chest. Richard actually smiled. A real, rare grin broke through his usually hard, stern face. He looked at me with what I briefly mistook for respect. It felt so incredibly good. It felt like, after all these years of feeling invisible, we were finally connecting. I felt a warm glow in my chest, thinking the years of hard work and quiet sacrifice were finally paying off in this one beautiful moment. But the warmth did not last. The glow in the room vanished as quickly as a blown-out candle. Diana's smile faltered. She glanced nervously across the table at Richard, and then her eyes shifted toward Garrett, who was aggressively chewing his food, pretending not to care. Diana cleared her throat, her voice taking on that soft, pleading tone she always used when she was about to ask for something unreasonable. She looked at me and said it would be really great if my brother could join us. Before I could even process the audacity of the request, Bianca chimed in. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands, offering a sugary, manipulative smile. She said a trip for all of us would be such a nice gesture, emphasizing the word gesture as if I owed them some sort of royal tribute. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. The beautiful moment I had carefully constructed was instantly hijacked. The air in the dining room grew thick and suffocating. I looked at Garrett. He was 28 years old, sitting there in a faded hoodie, scrolling through his phone, not even bothering to look up from the screen while his mother and wife begged for a free luxury vacation on my dime. I took a deep, shaky breath, fighting the sudden urge to cry, and forced my voice to remain perfectly steady. I looked right at Diana and stated, very clearly, that I was only covering the costs for her and Dad. If Garrett wanted to go to Hawaii, he could figure out a way to pay for his own ticket. The room went dead quiet. The sound of silverware clinking against porcelain stopped entirely. Richard's rare grin vanished, replaced instantly by a dark, thunderous scowl. He leaned heavily forward, planting his elbows on the table, casting a shadow over his plate. His tone was sharp and accusing when he told me that was incredibly unfair. He said my brother was working hard to build his career, and since I had all this new money, I should be the one to help him out. Help him out. The words echoed in my head, making my chest tighten with a familiar, suffocating pressure. I had been helping him out for years. I had sacrificed my own savings, my own peace of mind, just to keep a roof over his head while he played pretend on the internet. And worse, I remembered the massive, unpaid loan hanging over our heads. I raised my voice, the anger finally cracking through my polite facade. I looked Richard dead in the eye and reminded him that Garrett still owed me exactly $8,000. $8,000 that he had begged me for 2 years ago to buy new, top-of-the-line streaming gear, swearing up and down he would pay me back from his first big sponsorship. A sponsorship that never materialized. I told my father I was not a bank. Diana immediately jumped in, her hands fidgeting nervously with her napkin. She started reciting the same tired script she always used, saying that family supports each other, that Garrett was trying to make it big, and that I knew how tough the industry was. It was maddening. They were sitting there, eating the food I bought, in the house powered by the electricity I paid for, acting like I was the selfish, greedy villain of the story. Garrett finally glanced up from his phone, a lazy, entitled smirk playing on his lips. He told me to just chill, that it was just a trip, and to stop making it such a big deal. A big deal. Something inside me snapped. I pushed my chair back so hard it screeched against the hardwood floor. I stood up, towering over the table. I told them it was a massive deal when I was the only person in the house paying for everything. Richard slammed his heavy fist onto the table. The water glasses rattled violently, spilling over the edges. He pointed a thick finger at me and yelled that if I was going to be so unbearably stingy, maybe I should not be planning family trips at all. Stingy. The word cut into me like a jagged, rusty knife twisting deep in my gut. I looked at Diana, desperately hoping she would say something, anything, to defend me. But she just stared down at her lap, completely silent, choosing her precious son over me once again. I turned around and walked away from the table. That very night, I locked myself in my room and booked the Hawaii trip. But I did not book it for my parents. I booked 3 tickets, 1 for me and 2 for my best friends, Felix and Simon. The trip to Hawaii was beautiful, but it was a beauty tainted by a lingering, bitter shadow. I spent a full week surrounded by the absolute paradise of crystal clear ocean waters, warm tropical breezes, and the vibrant, lush greenery of the islands. Felix and Simon were the perfect travel companions. They did not ask me for money. They did not expect me to cater to their every whim. They just wanted to see me smile and relax. We drank tropical cocktails on the beach, went snorkeling among the coral reefs, and hiked up breathtaking volcanic trails. But even as I sat on the warm, white sand, watching the sun dip below the horizon and paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, my mind kept drifting back to that dining room table in Michigan. I could not shake the heavy feeling of betrayal. I found myself staring out at the rolling waves, diving deep into my own memories, trying to understand where it all went so wrong. Why was Garrett the golden child? Why was I always the afterthought? I remembered being 10 years old. It was Garrett's 13th birthday. My parents had surprised him with a brand new, incredibly expensive mountain bike. It had top-tier suspension, multiple gears, and a sleek matte black finish. He rode it once, got bored, and left it to rust in the garage. A few months later, for my birthday, I asked for a simple set of professional art supplies. I loved drawing, it was my escape. My parents handed me a dusty, hand-me-down scooter they had found at a garage sale and told me the art supplies were simply too expensive. I remembered high school. Garrett decided he wanted to be a professional soccer player. Richard and Diana immediately drained their small savings account to hire a private coach, buying him the best cleats and driving him to endless tournaments across the state. Garrett quit after 1 season because the coach told him he needed to run faster. When I wanted to take an advanced graphic design course that required a small tuition fee, I was told I needed to get a part-time job at a diner to pay for it myself because the family budget was tight. It was a lifetime of subtle, crushing inequalities. Richard saw his own failed ambitions in Garrett's wild, unrealistic schemes. Diana used Garrett as an emotional crutch, coddling him to feel needed. Together, they had built a fortress around my brother, a fortress constructed entirely out of my financial contributions and emotional neglect. Sitting on that Hawaiian beach, pouring my heart out to Felix and Simon, I finally started to understand the difference between blood relatives and a true family. Felix just listened, nodding slowly, never interrupting or telling me I was overreacting. Simon handed me another drink and told me I was worth more than what my parents thought of me. They offered me the validation and emotional safety I had been begging my parents for my entire life. I thought the worst of the conflict was over. I thought leaving them behind on this trip was the ultimate boundary. I had absolutely no idea what they were capable of doing the moment my back was turned. The journey back to Grand Rapids was a grueling, miserable test of physical endurance. It was over 10 hours of actual flying time, not including the miserable layovers in crowded, noisy airports. By the time I finally dragged myself off the last plane, my body felt like it was made of lead. My eyes were bloodshot, my muscles ached from sleeping in cramped airplane seats, and I was running on nothing but terrible airport coffee and sheer willpower. I just wanted to go home, lock myself in my bedroom, pull the heavy comforter over my head, and sleep for 3 solid days. The taxi ride from the airport was quiet. The vibrant, sun-drenched paradise of Hawaii was replaced by the familiar, gloomy, overcast skies of Michigan. A light, freezing drizzle was falling as the cab pulled into my suburban neighborhood. I paid the driver, tipping him generously, and hauled my heavy suitcase out of the trunk. As I walked up the driveway, the first sharp red flag hit me. The driveway was completely blocked. Garrett's beat-up, rusted sedan was parked haphazardly right in the middle, taking up the space where my car usually sat. Right next to it was Bianca's shiny, oversized SUV, parked at an angle that practically touched the grass. They had completely taken over the driveway, forcing me to drag my heavy suitcase through the wet, muddy lawn just to reach the front porch. I sighed, rolling my eyes. I assumed they were just being their usual inconsiderate selves, probably having guests over or just refusing to park on the street. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, expecting the usual chaotic noise of the house. I expected to hear the television blaring from the living room or the muffled sound of Garrett shouting obscenities at his computer screen. But instead, I was hit by a wall of absolute, eerie silence. The house was completely quiet. There were no lights on in the front room. There was no smell of dinner cooking in the kitchen. It felt entirely abandoned. I slipped off my wet shoes and left my suitcase by the front door. I just wanted to get to my room, change into my softest pajamas, and collapse. I walked down the familiar, dimly lit hallway toward my bedroom at the back of the house. Every step I took felt heavier. The silence was not peaceful, it felt heavy, like the breathless quiet right before a massive thunderstorm breaks. I reached the end of the hallway, turned the corner, and completely froze. The breath was violently knocked out of my lungs. I stood there, paralyzed, my tired eyes trying to comprehend the visual shock in front of me. The sturdy, familiar wooden door of my bedroom, the sanctuary I had painted, decorated, and paid to maintain, was fundamentally altered. The old brass doorknob was gone. In its place gleamed a heavy-duty deadbolt lock, the kind you would see on a warehouse door. But that was not the worst part. Hanging directly on the center of my door, buzzing with a cheap, electrical hum, was a massive, tacky neon sign. It glowed in a piercing, obnoxious bright blue light. The letters spelled out, Garrett's live stream studio. My heart started pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. A wave of cold, prickling panic washed over my skin. I dropped my carry-on bag. It hit the floor with a loud thud, but I did not care. I stepped forward and grabbed the cold metal of the new deadbolt. I twisted it, rattled it, shoved my shoulder against the wood. It was locked tight, sealed shut. Through the heavy wood, I could hear the faint, low hum of massive computer servers, the whir of cooling fans, and the muffled, obnoxious sound of Garrett laughing into a microphone. They had taken it. They had actually taken my room. A surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline wiped away every ounce of my exhaustion. My hands were shaking so violently I had to clench them into tight fists to stop the trembling. I spun around and marched down the hallway, my footsteps heavy and angry against the floorboards. I stormed into the kitchen. Bianca was standing there by the marble island, casually leaning against the counter, sipping a mug of hot coffee. She looked perfectly relaxed, dressed in an expensive silk robe that I probably indirectly paid for. She looked up as I entered, her expression barely registering any surprise. "Oh, Hazel, you're back," she said. Her tone was incredibly casual, dripping with a sickening sweetness, as if she were commenting on the weather instead of the fact that my entire life had just been violated. "Bianca, what is going on?" I demanded, my voice coming out sharp, loud, and trembling with rage. "Where is my room?" She slowly set her coffee mug down, rolling her eyes as if I were a child throwing an unreasonable tantrum. Garrett needed a professional setup for his streams, she said, waving her manicured hand dismissively toward the hallway. "You know how important his career is. His old room was just too small for the green screen and the new lighting rigs. Your room was the only space in the house big enough." I blinked, my brain struggling to process the sheer audacity of her words. "My room?" I repeated, my voice rising to a near shout. "My room? You destroyed my personal space without even asking me." Bianca shrugged, a patronizing little smile playing on her lips. It was a look of pure, unapologetic triumph. We figured you would not mind, she lied smoothly. You are barely here anyway with all your work projects and trips. Besides, Garrett is on the verge of a massive sponsorship. He needs this. Barely here. I practically screamed. I have been living in this house my entire life. I pay the bills that keep those lights on. Where is my stuff? Where are my clothes? My equipment? Bianca pointed a lazy finger toward the back window, gesturing out into the dark, rainy yard. We put it in the shed, she said. It is totally fine out there. Just temporary. The shed. An uninsulated, leaky wooden box in the backyard filled with spiders, mold, and rotting lawn equipment. That was where they had shoved my entire existence. Thank you for following the story. If you empathize with or feel outraged on behalf of the main character, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to leave a comment letting us know the name of the city you live in. Every comment and interaction helps the video reach more viewers, helping our community grow stronger. Thank you so much for your continued support. Now, let's return to the next tense development in the story. I left Bianca standing in the kitchen, her smug little smile burning into my retinas. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely feel my fingertips. I needed to find my parents. I needed them to tell me this was a horrible joke, a mistake, a temporary lapse in sanity. I marched down the hall, the sound of my own wet shoes slapping against the hardwood echoing in the quiet house. I found my mother, Diana, in the laundry room. She was standing under the harsh fluorescent light, meticulously folding a stack of white towels. She did not even look up when I walked in. She just kept smoothing down the edges of the fabric, her movements stiff and robotic. I asked her why my room had been turned into a studio. My voice cracked. I did not want to sound weak, but the sheer shock of it was tearing my throat apart. Diana paused. She kept her eyes glued to the towels, completely avoiding my gaze. She murmured softly, almost like a rehearsed script, that Garrett's career was finally taking off. She said he needed a proper, professional space to keep up with his sponsors, and that they genuinely thought I would understand. Understand? My head was spinning so fast I felt nauseous. They had violated my privacy, dismantled my personal space, and dumped my belongings into a rotting shed in the backyard, all for Garrett's imaginary career. I asked her why she did not even call me. Why she did not ask. Diana just let out a long, heavy sigh, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. She said it was just a room, and that family makes sacrifices. I had been sacrificing my time, my money, and my youth for years. They had never sacrificed a single thing for me. I turned my back on her. I could not look at her pathetic, cowardly face for 1 second longer. I stomped into the living room, my vision blurring with furious tears. I found my father, Richard. He was sitting in his worn leather recliner, casually flipping through the evening newspaper. He lowered the paper as I approached, his eyes narrowing into cold, hard slits. He asked what this was all about, as if he did not already know exactly what he had authorized. I demanded to know why my things were in the shed. I demanded to know why my room was gone. My words hung in the air, sharp and direct. Richard leaned back in his chair, crossing his thick arms over his chest. His tone was entirely devoid of warmth. He stated that my brother's career was important. He claimed Garrett had sponsors counting on him, which we both knew was a complete fabrication. He looked me up and down, a sneer forming on his lips, and said I had my digital creator job, so I did not need that room as much as Garrett did. I could not believe the absolute delusion I was witnessing. My job, my actual, paying job that kept the internet running in this very house, meant absolutely nothing to him. All my contributions were instantly erased because Garrett decided he wanted to play video games in a bigger room. I snapped. I yelled that I had been paying bills in this house for years. I asked what about me? What about my life? Richard stood up. He was a tall man, and he used his height to try and intimidate me, looming over me with a dark, furious expression. He pointed a thick finger directly at my face. He told me I had 2 options. He said I could stay in the shed, or I could get out of his house. The words hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. My own father. The man who was supposed to protect me, choosing a lazy, entitled son over the daughter who had kept them afloat. He was reducing my entire existence to a dusty, freezing corner of the backyard. I looked back toward the hallway, hoping Diana would step out, hoping she would finally find her spine and defend me. But the hallway remained empty. She was still hiding behind her folded towels. And Garrett was still locked in my former room, completely oblivious or simply uncaring about the chaos he had caused. I felt the crushing weight of 25 years of being pushed aside. I was always second, always the afterthought, always the backup plan. I asked him, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper, if he was serious. Richard did not even flinch. He said that was the deal. Something deep inside my chest finally snapped. It was not a loud break, it was a quiet, profound severing of the last emotional tie I had to these people. I realized I was never going to win. I was never going to be loved the way Garrett was loved. And, suddenly, I did not want to be. I was not going to beg for a place in my own home. I looked my father dead in the eye, my voice steady, cold, and completely empty of affection. I told him I was done. I turned around and walked out of the living room. I did not run. I did not cry. I marched straight through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the freezing Michigan drizzle. I walked across the muddy lawn toward the sagging, rotting structure of the shed. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of wet earth, gasoline, and black mold. I reached up and pulled the string for the single, flickering overhead bulb. In the dim, yellowish light, I saw my life. My belongings were piled carelessly in the corner like literal garbage. My favorite winter jacket was crumpled up, completely ruined, shoved under a heavy, greasy box of Garrett's discarded computer parts. My books, the ones I had collected since middle school, were tossed into a plastic bin with the lids missing, their pages curling from the damp air. My old sketchbooks, the ones they refused to pay for when I was a kid, were buried under a pile of tangled cables. My hands moved mechanically. I found a large canvas duffel bag near the bottom of the pile and just started throwing things into it. I grabbed my laptop, my external hard drives, a few changes of clothes, and whatever toiletries I could dig out of the mess. Every item I touched felt like a physical reminder of their disdain for me. They had not carefully packed my things. They had swept me away like dust. I dragged the heavy duffel bag out of the shed. The rain was falling harder now, soaking through my thin sweater, but I barely felt the cold. I hauled the bag to my car, popping the trunk and throwing it inside. I stood in the driveway for a long moment, looking back at the house. The lights were on in the living room. The obnoxious blue glow from the neon sign on my old bedroom door filtered through the hallway window. The house was entirely silent. Not a single person came out to stop me. Not a single person even peeked through the blinds to see if I was okay. I was utterly, completely disposable to them. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and pulled out my phone. My hands were finally shaking again, vibrating with the delayed shock of the trauma. I opened my messages and texted Felix, my best friend since middle school. I typed, asking if I could crash at his place tonight. The reply came almost instantly, a beacon of light in the darkest night of my life. He told me to get over there immediately, that the door was open. Driving through the wet, slick streets of Grand Rapids, a strange, terrifying mix of grief and intense relief washed over me. The roads were familiar, but the life I had known for 25 years was dead and gone. I arrived at Felix's apartment on the east side of the city. It was a small, cluttered, lived-in space, nothing fancy at all, but the moment I walked through the door, it felt infinitely safer than the house I had just fled. Felix was sitting on his worn-out couch, a half-eaten pizza box on the coffee table. The moment he saw my face, he stood up, his expression shifting from relaxed to deep concern. He asked me what happened. I dropped my bag on the floor and just sank onto the cushions. I told him everything. I told him about the neon sign. I told him about Bianca's smug face. I told him about Diana hiding in the laundry room and Richard telling me to sleep in the dirt. Saying the words out loud made the betrayal incredibly real, and the tears I had been holding back finally broke free. I sobbed until my chest physically ached. Felix did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me family is complicated. He leaned forward, looking me in the eyes, and told me it was completely messed up and that I did not deserve any of it. He and Simon, who arrived 20 minutes later with a six-pack of beer and a listening ear, spent the entire night validating my pain. They set up a small air mattress for me in Felix's tiny spare room. It was narrow, it smelled faintly of dust, and the blankets were mismatched. But as I lay there that night, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized something profound. I was not running away. I was finally choosing myself. For the first time in my life, I had drawn a boundary that no one was allowed to cross. It hurt like hell, but it was the pain of a wound finally being cleaned so it could heal. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache, the weight of yesterday pressing down on my chest like a heavy stone. The small apartment smelled like stale coffee and yesterday's pizza. But when I walked out into the living room, Felix and Simon were already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table with two laptops open. They did not push me to talk about the trauma. They did not ask me how I was feeling, because they already knew I was shattered. Instead, they jumped straight into action. Simon pushed a cup of black coffee toward me and told me I needed my own place, an actual fortress where no one could touch me. Within an hour, the three of us were aggressively scouring the Grand Rapids rental market. We filtered through dozens of listings, crossing off anything out of my immediate budget, focusing on safety and quiet. By noon, we had found it. A beautiful, cozy one-bedroom apartment right downtown, featuring massive windows that let in a flood of natural light. The rent was exactly $1,200 a month. It was an expense, but with my recent $30,000 contract, I knew I could easily manage it. We drove to the leasing office that very afternoon. Simon cracked terrible jokes the entire ride, refusing to let me sink into depression. As I signed my name on the lease agreement, the pen felt heavy, but it felt right. Felix clapped me on the shoulder, grinning, and announced that this place was infinitely better than a rotting shed. I laughed. It was a weak, raspy laugh, but it was the first spark of genuine joy I had felt in days. Moving in took exactly 1 weekend. I had almost nothing to move, just the meager contents of my duffel bag and a few boxes we managed to salvage from the shed before my parents noticed. Felix hauled the boxes up the 2 flights of stairs. Simon meticulously set up my high-speed internet router, making sure I had the perfect connection for my work. We ate cheap takeout on the bare wooden floor of the living room, surrounded by empty space. Every step of setting up that apartment felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul. With a space to finally call my own, completely insulated from the toxic drain of my biological family, I threw myself into my work with a manic, beautiful obsession. As a digital creator, I had always been good, but living in that house had been like trying to run a marathon while dragging a ball and chain. I no longer had to listen to Garrett screaming at 3 in the morning. I no longer had to endure Diana's endless, draining excuses. I no longer had to hand over my hard-earned money to Richard to pay for bills that were not mine. In the absolute quiet of my new apartment, my mind exploded with creativity. I pitched massive, ambitious ideas to new clients. I started collaborating with brands I had previously thought were entirely out of my league. I even launched a passion project, a video series detailing the psychology of breaking away from toxic environments and forging your own path. The freedom was intoxicating. Within just 2 months, my monthly income had completely doubled. I landed another long-term client, securing a contract worth exactly $50,000. I was not just surviving on the margins anymore. I was thriving. I was building immense, undeniable wealth. My chosen family, Felix and Simon, were my biggest cheerleaders. They dropped by constantly, bringing cheap wine and takeout to celebrate every minor milestone. They reminded me daily what real, unconditional support looked like. People who lifted you up because they loved you, not because they wanted to drain your bank account. I built a meticulous, healthy routine. My mornings were dedicated to aggressive video editing and script writing. My afternoons were blocked out for high-level client meetings. I joined an upscale co-working space downtown, surrounding myself with other driven, ambitious creators. My audience grew exponentially. Thousands of new viewers poured into my channels, leaving heartfelt comments about how my independence inspired them to leave their own terrible situations. I felt a profound sense of purpose. But healing is never perfectly linear. There were nights when the silence of the apartment felt heavy. Late at night, when the glow of the monitors faded, doubt would occasionally creep into my mind. I would lie in my new, expensive bed and wonder if I had been too harsh. I would wonder if I should have stayed and fought harder for my place in the family. But every single time that toxic guilt tried to take root, I would forcefully remind myself of the neon sign. I would remember the smell of the damp shed. I would remember Richard's cold eyes telling me to sleep in the dirt. I had made the right choice. To protect my sanity, I kept my entire family muted on my phone. I did not block them. Some ingrained, lingering sense of duty made me keep the line technically open for extreme emergencies, but I silenced their notifications. Weeks turned into months, and the silence from their end was both painful and incredibly liberating. It confirmed exactly what I always knew: they did not actually care about me. They only cared about what I provided. By the end of that first year, I had transformed my empty apartment into a stunning, warm home. I bought lush indoor plants, a massive, comfortable velvet couch, and decorated the walls with local art. I was stable. I was happy. I was entirely self-sufficient. I thought the nightmare of my past was firmly, permanently locked away. It was exactly 1 year later. I was sitting at my sleek, modern desk, sipping an iced coffee and intensely prepping a massive pitch for a potential corporate sponsor. The afternoon sun was streaming through my large windows, casting a warm, golden glow across my hardwood floors. My life was peaceful. Suddenly, my phone screen lit up. The device vibrated aggressively against the wood of the desk. I glanced at it, expecting an email from a client or a meme from Simon. Instead, a name I had not seen in 12 months flashed across the screen. Bianca. It was a text message. It was short, desperate, and completely lacked her usual smug, patronizing tone. It read, "Hazel, we need to talk. It is incredibly urgent." My stomach instantly churned, tying itself into a painful, familiar knot. The sudden intrusion of her name felt like a splash of ice water. I immediately ignored it, flipping my phone face down, determined to focus on my pitch. But then the phone vibrated again. And again. And again. The buzzing became a relentless, frantic rhythm. I picked the phone up, my heart pounding, and opened my hidden notifications log. My breath caught in my throat. I had exactly 60 missed calls. 60. All of them from Diana. There were also dozens of frantic texts, all variations of "Where are you?" and "Please pick up the phone." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My first, terrifying thought was that someone had died. A car crash. A heart attack. Despite everything they had done to me, human instinct took over. I clicked on the single voicemail Diana had left. I did not listen to it alone. I immediately called Felix and Simon, asking them to meet me at our favorite local coffee shop. When I arrived, they were already sitting at a corner booth, their faces grim. I sat down, placed my phone in the center of the wooden table, and hit play on the speakerphone. Diana's voice filled the small space between us. It was shaky, raw, and almost completely unrecognizable. She was weeping hysterically. "Hazel, please call me back." The voicemail played, the audio distorted by her sobbing. "We are in terrible trouble. Garrett needs you. Please, Hazel. Garrett needs you." The audio cut off. The three of us sat in stunned silence. The coffee shop around us buzzed with the ambient noise of espresso machines and chatter, but my world had narrowed down to that little black rectangle on the table. Those 3 words hit me like a physical slap across the face. Garrett needs you. After a year of absolute silence. After evicting me, throwing my life into a shed, and erasing my existence from their home, they were finally reaching out. And it was not to apologize. It was not to see if I was alive or dead. It was because the golden child needed a bailout. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it made a wave of hot, absolute disgust rise in my throat. I took a deep breath, looked at Felix, who gave me a firm nod of encouragement, and dialed Diana's number. She answered on the very first ring. "Hazel, Thank God, oh thank God, she cried, her voice frantic and breathless. I kept my voice perfectly flat, entirely devoid of emotion. What happened, Diana? The truth came spilling out of her in a pathetic, broken torrent. The grand illusion of Garrett's streaming career had violently collapsed. It turned out, Garrett was not just failing to get sponsors, he had developed a severe, crippling addiction to online gambling. While I was gone, while they were coddling him in my stolen bedroom, he had been spending his nights blowing thousands upon thousands of dollars on digital blackjack and unregulated crypto casinos. He had borrowed money from incredibly shady people online. When his few actual sponsors caught wind of his catastrophic financial mess and erratic behavior, they dropped him instantly. But it did not stop there. The debt was massive. It was a black hole that swallowed everything. Diana wept as she confessed that Garrett owed tens of thousands of dollars, and the collectors were threatening legal action that would ruin him forever. We had to sell the house, Hazel, Diana sobbed, the sound echoing through the phone. We lost the house. The bank took most of it to cover the second mortgage Richard took out to pay off Garrett's debts. We have nothing left. I gripped the edge of the coffee shop table. The house. My childhood home. The roof I had poured thousands of my own dollars into repairing and maintaining. It was gone. Evaporated into thin air because of Garrett's reckless, arrogant stupidity and my parents' blind, foolish enabling. I felt a brief, sharp pang of loss for the physical structure, but absolutely no surprise. This was exactly who Garrett was. He chased quick wins, lived in a fantasy world, and never once considered the catastrophic fallout of his actions. What do you want from me? I asked. My tone was so cold it could have frozen water. Diana hesitated. I could hear her ragged breathing. Then, the inevitable request came. We need your help, Hazel. We know you are doing so well now. We see your videos. We need money. Just a loan. And maybe a place to stay for a few weeks while we figure things out. I actually let out a short, dry laugh. It was entirely involuntary. After they had violently kicked me out, taken my sanctuary, and completely ignored my existence for a full year, they genuinely believed I would open my door and hand over my hard-earned wealth to save them. Before I could even form a response, I heard shuffling on the other end of the line. Bianca's voice came through. She must have grabbed the phone. Hazel, please, she begged. Her usual arrogant smugness was entirely gone, replaced by the whining tone of a cornered rat. Garrett is an absolute mess. He is not sleeping. We are family, Hazel. You have a huge apartment. Can you not just help us out? Her words burned like acid. Family. They had not treated me like family when they ripped the doorknob off my bedroom. They had not treated me like family when Richard commanded me to sleep in the dirt. Now, with their delusion shattered and their world reduced to ashes, they saw me as their convenient, wealthy safety net. I closed my eyes, steadying my breathing. I felt the comforting presence of Felix and Simon sitting across from me, a silent reminder of what true loyalty looked like. Bianca, I said, my voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. You do not get to use the word family with me. Not ever again. You made your choices. I heard Diana crying louder in the background, but I did not stop. Richard told me I had two options. Stay in the rotting shed or get out. I got out. I built my own life from nothing, with absolutely zero help from any of you. You chose to invest everything you had into Garrett's delusions. You bet the entire house on him, literally. So go ask Garrett to fix it. Hazel, please, you cannot just abandon us. Diana shrieked into the phone. I am not abandoning you, I replied smoothly. I am simply holding you accountable. I supported you for years, and you threw me away like garbage. I am not cleaning up this mess. Do not ever call this number again. I hit the red button on the screen. The call ended. I navigated to my settings, selected their contacts, and permanently blocked every single one of their numbers. I set the phone down on the table. My hands were perfectly steady. My chest, which had carried a heavy block of anxiety for 25 years, suddenly felt light, expansive, and free. I looked up at Felix and Simon. Their faces were a mixture of absolute shock and fierce, undeniable pride. You did exactly the right thing, Simon said, leaning back and crossing his arms. They made their bed, Felix added, sliding my coffee closer to me. Now they have to sleep in it. Somewhere else. Later that week, I heard through a distant mutual acquaintance that the situation was exactly as catastrophic as Diana had claimed. Garrett's streaming equipment, the gear I had originally paid for, was sold to a pawn shop for a fraction of its value. Richard and Diana were currently renting a cramped, dingy two-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town, draining the last of their meager retirement funds just to keep the lights on. Garrett had not streamed a single minute in months. His non-existent career was entirely dead. Bianca was reportedly scrambling to find a minimum-wage retail job, furious that her lavish lifestyle had vanished overnight. I felt a fleeting, microscopic flicker of pity for them, but it faded as quickly as a shadow in the midday sun. They had built this disaster with their own two hands. I had chosen my own path, and looking back, walking out into the freezing rain that night was the hardest, but absolutely the best decision I had ever made in my entire life. Leaving that house in Grand Rapids was not just about escaping Garrett's chaotic entitlement or my parents' brutal betrayal. It was about discovering exactly what I was capable of achieving when I was not chained to an anchor. I learned that true independence is not just about paying your own rent. It is about trusting yourself entirely to build a life that reflects your true value, not the diminished, pathetic version of yourself that toxic people expect you to be. Felix and Simon taught me the true, profound meaning of support. When I was bleeding out emotionally, they did not just offer a couch, they offered a fortress. They believed in my potential when my own parents treated me like an inconvenience. Their friendship was undeniable proof that the family you choose will always mean infinitely more than the blood in your veins. My life is entirely my own now. My career as a digital creator is not just thriving, it is soaring. My beautiful, sunlit apartment feels like a true sanctuary, and I am surrounded every single day by people who lift me up instead of dragging me down. I have learned to ruthlessly prioritize my own peace and to invest only in relationships that are mutual, respectful, and genuine. If you are listening to this and you are facing a similar struggle, if you are being drained by people who demand your warmth while leaving you out in the cold, please know this: you are so much stronger than you think. You do not have to stay in a place or with people who constantly diminish your light. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to choose yourself. They chose to demolish my room and my trust to fund a fantasy, and now they expect me to be their safety net. So, tell me, am I wrong for leaving them to face the consequences of their own favorite child? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button to join our family and hear more stories like this. See you in the next video.